The West's world police complex and America's fixation on controlling global power have, ironically, set the stage for its own opposition. This is because they have spent decades using sanctions and surveillance to force their own brand of freedom, democracy, human rights, and government on other developing countries. The US is now facing an alliance that it made by accident by being too proud. BRICS isn't just a group. It's a movement driven by anger, inventiveness, and a desire to break free from the West's control. Maybe it's poetic justice that the West planted the seeds that are now growing into the storm that could topple it. From 1450 to 1750, the West, which claims to be the world's protector of peace, set the rules for the whole world in a way that benefits itself. This is still the case today. Europe saw a series of economic and political transformations that set the stage for its dominance by the period from 1750 to 1914. European nations and their allies, including the United States and Australia, then a British colony, leveraged its resources and strategic location in the Asia-Pacific to increase British and later Australian influence in the region. The Industrial Revolution, which kicked off in Britain in the late 1700s, gave Western powers a massive edge in both technology and military might. With this advantage, Europe didn't just expand, it created sprawling colonial empires, positioning itself as the global economic leader. From China to the Muslim states to Africa, nearly every other region fell into the have-nots category, while the West held the position of the haves. And the West's dominance didn't stop at politics or the economy, it stretched into cultural and artistic influence, reshaping societies worldwide. Then after World War II, two superpowers emerged, the Soviet Union and the United States. Tensions between them created the Cold War, a time of intense rivalry, but no direct fighting between the two. Instead, they used espionage, propaganda, and supported conflicts around the world called proxy wars to expand their influence. There were two sides in Europe: the Western Bloc, which was led by the US and rebuilt with the Marshall Plan, and the Eastern Bloc, which was controlled by the USSR and separated by an Iron Curtain. The nuclear arms race between the US and USSR kept both sides from going to full war, because any conflict could lead to total destruction or mutually assured destruction. Countries that didn't want to take sides formed the non-aligned movement, which tried to stay neutral in the conflict. This global struggle, then we entered the concept of Western benevolence, which expanded during the Cold War but was truly rooted in the justification for colonialism and imperial expansion. The West presented actions like foreign aid intervention or democracy promotion as acts of goodwill or charity. However, these actions often came with strings attached, serving Western interests more than genuinely helping the receiving nations. Then we saw the era of organization starting in the 1940s. Right after World War II, we saw the creation and implementation of Western, or let's be honest, mainly us-led intergovernmental organizations that have essentially been shaping, or should I say governing, the global order. Just look at the lineup. We've got the United Nations in 1945, our global peacekeeper, well failed, mostly followed by NATO in 1949, which was supposed to be just a defensive alliance that keeps expanding and responding to threats everywhere. Then in 1957 we get the European Union, a cozy economic bloc that quickly grew into a central authority on everything from cucumbers to carbon emissions. By 1961, the OECD was born to promote economic development, or as it often translates, play by our rules if you want funding. Then in 1989 the FATF arrived, ostensibly to tackle financial crimes, but let's be honest, it's mostly about keeping countries that stray from Western norms in check. Enter the WTO in 1995, where the West basically decides who gets to trade with whom and under what conditions. Next up, the G7, originally the G6 in 1975, the elite club of the world's top economies, where they discussed global stability, that is how to keep the dominance intact. We can't forget the International Atomic Energy Agency of 1957, ensuring nuclear power stays with the right countries, and the Paris Club 1956, a quiet group of creditor nations deciding how to manage global debt on their terms. Of course, from reckless withdrawal morals like Afghanistan to relentless interference across the Middle East, Latin America and Africa, us actions have only soon instability and resentment. The invasions, regime changes and military aid to oppressive factions have left shattered economies and fractured societies in their wake. Under the guise of promoting democracy, America has caused chaos and divisions to further its own goals, while organizations like NATO push closer ties with Russia, and the IMF and World Bank trap countries in debt to serve Western interests. There is a theme running through all of these groups. Mostly Western countries set the rules and, let's face it, act like the global gods of policy, making sure that everyone follows Western financial rules. This is all part of the US's grand strategy to control global narratives, trade, and security, making sure that the world stays in its pocket. So, let's look at how America's dominance is finally coming back to haunt it. After decades of aggressively reshaping the global order, its policies that don't take developing countries' needs into account, now BRICS is becoming a threat to this rule. The West usually doesn't take the alliance seriously, seeing it as nothing more than a political sideshow. But is it really just a sideshow? Could BRICS really be changing the world order? Maybe a change in US government could actually affect BRICS. Big plans. Let's get into this topic and find out if BRICS is just a background player or a force that could shake things up for the West. First, the US will always put its own interests first, no matter who is in power. While Trump and Biden agree on this, their ways of doing it are different. If the US changes leaders, BRICS plans could be affected. If the new US government changes its foreign policy by doing things like lowering penalties or switching trade tactics, it could affect how the BRICS countries go about achieving their goals. A more cooperative US could ease BRICS wants a global system that is not controlled by the US, but a tougher stance from the US could make the BRICS countries work together more strongly against US power. Now BRICS countries Brazil, Russia and India. Many people don't realize how powerful China and South Africa are as an economic bloc. Together, they control more than a quarter of the world's land, 42% of its people, and about 35% of the world's GDP, which has a total output of $27 trillion since Egypt joined. Iran, Arabian Gulf, the UAE and Ethiopia. It is expected to have a big effect on the world economy. It will give BRICS a bigger say in global energy markets. It controls about 40% of the world's oil production, and give it a bigger part of global trade and cash. The bloc's influence is growing, but it's still not as strong as the G7, which controls 43% of the world's GDP. Recently, its members have stepped up plans for more internal trade and even talked about a common currency to lessen Western influence. Now, if these countries formed a trade bloc, like trading BRICS, the US could face serious economic problems. It would miss out on global trade that's been central to its growth, and military actions would cost less for this new bloc. Even if this group only deals with trade agreements, their size and power could change the global economy. BRICS has been working on creating alternatives to Western-style systems. Their first project is the New Development Bank, which helps developing economies in a way similar to the IMF but on a regional level. They've also suggested undersea cables to connect BRICS countries, despite Brazil's geographical isolation, as well as a BRICS game system for member nations and a new reserve currency. Their ultimate goal is to build an independent financial infrastructure. Several other countries have shown interest in joining BRICS, such as Algeria, which has only applied, and Bahrain. Malaysia and other countries want to join the group, which means there will be two separate economic blocs and work on making new payment networks. But why do these countries want to pull away from the rest of the world? BRICS countries want to reduce their reliance on the West to avoid economic sanctions that might be imposed if they pursue controversial goals. This is made worse by Russia's exclusion from global payment networks like SWIFT. By forming an economic bloc, they gain shared resources and strength, making them less vulnerable to Western pressure. US spying, like the NSA's data interception, has also made these countries look for safer ways to communicate, especially through projects like the quantum communication tests between Russia and China, which offer very safe ways to send data. These countries are still having trouble achieving full independence, but their economies haven't grown as quickly as they used to. Sanctions and Russia's role in Ukraine have hurt its economy, which has stopped growing. Brazil's economy has been unstable because of the political situation, and South Africa has low growth rates because of problems with its structure. China's once rapid economic growth is also slowing down because of high debt, trade issues, and an aging population. In the meantime, India's growing population makes it harder to invest in building projects because of the country's economic needs. Many of these problems are caused by both internal economic factors and Western impact, especially through trade rules and penalties that slow down growth, but the West still has power because of its resources. Workforce, technology, and nuclear power. With its large economy and strong growth, the BRICS industry seems strong. This is mostly because of China, but India has also helped, more than making up for problems in other economies. However, China alone makes more BRICS than the rest of the industry put together, giving it the most power. BRICS countries have strong economies, but they haven't reached many of their main goals. For example, there has been talk of making a new BRICS currency to cut down on corruption, but this hasn't happened yet. Relying on the US dollar, no real steps have been taken. The Chinese renminbi only makes up 2.7% of global reserves, and all BRICS currencies together only make up 3.4%. For the BRICS group to have a stronger presence in global reserves, the combined currencies would need to make up a lot more than the current 6.1% share. They would like to see at least 15 to 20% of global reserves held by countries other than the US dollar, which currently holds more than 50% of global reserves. A bigger share of reserves would not only show more faith in BRICS currencies, but it would also give these countries more power in the global economy, letting them have a say in trade and financial policies. Could the BRICS nations reach their goal and avoid Western economic penalties by building their own economic bloc? That is the real question. It's clear that BRICS is becoming a global powerhouse, even if the West is trying to slow them down out of fear of losing control. As BRICS becomes a stronger force, the US may be watching with worry, realizing that its grip on world order may be weakening. After all, BRICS isn't just an economic grouping, it's a coalition ready to change the way global power works. In a strange way, America's power has made BRICS more determined. As they move closer to a shared currency and strengthen their trade network, they're sending a message that economic independence doesn't mean being obedient to the dollar. Maybe BRICS is America's own creation, a coalition born of US policies and pressures that could one day become a NATO-like alliance, coming back to haunt its global dominance.